Hello again, everybody. This is Steve, coming to you with another writing intro video. This is on dialogue and narration. One of the things that a lot of people may or may not realize is that a typical story is built of two basic parts. The first is what I call narration, which I'm sure a lot of other people call it that. That's the part where the author is telling the story. And narration is where the dialogue is telling the story. Both of them tell the story, but just in a different way. The dialogue, or the narration part, is the author. Well, I mean, the author is doing both of them, but I mean, as far as from the perspective of the reader, the author or the story is telling you about the story, about what's going on, about the world, describing different things and such like that. And it's used for a large percentage of, your story, your book, and etc. like that, producing background, building the story, building the world, etc. But then there are certain things that can't be relayed effectively outside of using dialogue. And really, if you relate that to real life world, you're talking about something that we live that every single day. Our conversations are the dialogue part, and as we're viewing the world, that would essentially be the narration. We're watching the world happen around us. We're seeing the buildings and the cars and the trees and the animals and all that, and our mind and our eyes and our senses are doing the narration for us. So it's just a different way of doing the same thing that we already do in everyday life. Looking at this in an actual story format, and this also goes into my previous video about punctuation and stuff like that. Doing the narration and the dialogue is going to be an important part of creating your story, and it's going to be an important part of editing your story. I was going to do a video on editing, but I think that should be pretty self-explanatory. One thing I will tell you about, and that's... let me think on that. Well, I'll cover that in a different video. Never mind. I'll focus on tools in a different video, and we'll go over those, because there's a bunch of really useful tools you can use for your editing and stuff. I think I've mentioned Grammarly already. If I haven't, I'll mention it now. Grammarly is a great tool. I wouldn't lean on it as a crutch, or as your sole means for doing all of your editing and your writing and stuff, because Grammarly has its own voice, and you as an author need to have your own unique voice. It's like when you listen to different people read the same sentence, different people will add different inflections, different emphasis, different style to it. And like I say, it's just like what different readers have different ways of producing, or not producing, reading a particular block of text. You need to have your own voice when it comes to the narration part of it. So like when you're doing this here, you need what you're looking to do is you're looking to pass along information, but you're also looking to pass along the emotion of the scene, how it feels. Can you make the person, like if you're describing a prairie, can you relay the smell of the grass, the flowers? Maybe there's birds overhead. It might be songbirds. It might be a vulture. Because it's a prairie doesn't necessarily mean it has to be all flowers and bunnies and fluffy birds and all that kind of stuff. You might have a prairie that is desolate, barren, as covered in rotting carcasses, and you got the vultures circling overhead with the various predatory four-legged beasts on the ground over there, ripping apart dead carcasses and eating the necrotic flesh. And I probably just grossed a few of you out, but you see what I'm saying here, because when you were hearing me talk about the good part of it, the flowers and the birds and the fluffy bunnies. It gave you that warm, happy feeling. And then I turned around and did the exact opposite, and all of a sudden you're just, just like, oh, that just soured the lunch in your stomach. So it's telling the tale in a way that what you see, what you feel, is passed on to the reader. That's one of the big challenges. And Grammarly is very, I would say, sterile in how it does its stuff. Where Grammarly comes in useful is it helps you get the correct grammar to follow English rules of writing, or whatever language you happen to be writing in. English is the one I obviously write in because that's my native language. But if you write in Spanish, you write in German, you write in Farsi, whatever it happens to be, you need to be able to take what you're feeling, what you're seeing and experiencing as you're writing this, and put that into the book so that the other person can feel it. You think of the book as like the middleman. You are giving somebody else or you are dictating or narrating to somebody else everything that you're experiencing. You're passing that along, but it has to go through the pages of the book and through the text that's on the page. So, anyways, when it comes to narration, the narration part of it, one thing you want to do is you want to make sure you don't info dump. Info dumping is basically putting down way more information than you need to. The rule I like to follow is just enough and never more. Now, sometimes you can get a little thin on the information doing it that way, but it keeps you from info dumping, and info dumping tends to be the more dominant habit. You want to, you've got, you could have 6 chapters of description worth of what you see in your mind, but really the only thing you need for that scene is maybe 2 paragraphs of that. So you need to be able to take all of what you see, that big 6-chapter description, and distill it down to those 2 paragraphs. One of the things, like a good example of getting a little too carried away with your descriptions and your narration is Lord of the Rings. That one, it was a really, really good story. The problem is, J.R.R. Tolkien was infamous for going overboard in his descriptions, which is fine if you're doing like an overview of the world, something that's not the actual story. You could go and write that book and just literally go hog wild, because it becomes kind of like a monster. What do they call those? A gazetteer or a monster manual, where in the book you need to tell him he was big, ugly, and troll-like. That might be all you need to tell about him. In the gazetteer, you've got 5 pages on this one character, and it talks about all the details about him, preference of weapons, the weapon he has, the curve, the shape, the whole 9 yards. So there's places for going overboard, and there's places you should not go overboard. And when you look at Lord of the Rings, it was about 450,000 words. If you took all of the descriptions and simplified them, he could have fit that whole story into about 150,000, 200,000 words. I would say probably closer to 150,000, because he goes way overboard on stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not an enjoyable read. I mean, I've gone through Lord of the Rings countless times. It's just the fact that J.R.R. Tolkien really, really went overboard in his stuff. It's kind of like I'm having one of my name brain dead days here. Isaac Asimov. That's what I'm thinking of. Isaac Asimov. He is real. He was really, really good with world building. The problem is, in my opinion, he went overboard with the world building to the point where it was boring. Now, it doesn't mean his stories weren't good. It's just that what he did in 6 chapters probably would have been best done in 1. if he could have compacted all of that down and did it in one, it would have been absolutely perfect. But yeah, he's one of those guys that was a really great author, but he got too carried away in a certain key area, and that's what you have to kind of avoid. You need to get that nice, happy balance. And since I'm easily bored, it makes it a little easier for me to keep that happy balance, because I know if I'm getting bored, you're probably gonna be going catatonic with your boredom on the other end. So, another thing too, and this will fall more into editing, which I guess I'll cover on another one. Narration should also be done in a way that is, if you're narrating stuff, you need to keep it simple, keep it focused. You don't want to spend a whole chapter, or 2 chapters, or 3 chapters, or whatever, describing something or a scene or a bit of action or something like that. Now, there are situations where that's doable, but and sometimes necessary, because like in after Offworld 3, The Rise of Offworld, the prologue is, I think, like 3 or 4 pages long, and that's like the 8.5 by 11, so you're talking like 10 pages, maybe upwards of 12 in a regular paperback size. And that, of course I've seen bigger prologues than that. Who is it? The guy who does the naval books. Again, I'm having one of my my naming problems. Well, anyways, he writes a lot of naval fiction. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. They did some movies with him too. Let's see if I can find it real quick. If I can, I'll just move on here. Okay, anyways, I can't think of his name. But anyways, he wrote a lot of great naval fiction. And now I got off on that, forgot what I was going to say. Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, he has one of his books where they talk about the Russian crown jewels, and his prologue is huge, just huge. And in most cases, a large prologue like that is discouraged, but in his case, he actually made it work, and it actually helped the story. And like I say, I think you all know who I'm talking about. He's the guy who has like the naval officer, and he'll periodically go over to this one guy who's a total gourmand, big chunky dude, but he's also this really, really good he's really good at naval history and stuff like that. And his name's something like Piersmetter or Piermetter or something like that. But yeah, he's he's the author I'm thinking of. Like I say, narration. The rules of narration apply in that too. But I know what I was getting at with all of this. I'm sitting there going like, okay, I'm on this little tangent. What was I getting at? My point that I was getting at was you want to take your narration parts and kind of break them up. Break them up with dialogue. You can break them up with kind of scene shifts. You want it where you're not in there just they went to town, they bought some cheese, they got some bread. You don't want that. You don't want it to kind of drag. You want to understand that most readers nowadays kind of have a little bit of that squirrel ooh shiny mentality. So you got to keep throwing things in there that catch their attention and keep them hooked in there. And if you're a person like me that's easily bored, that becomes a lot easier. If you're somebody who's not easily bored, that's going to be a bit more of a challenge. Narration also needs to flow well into dialogue. Like here, the first part here, this big block of text is all narration, and then once you get down to here, you have your transition from the narration to the dialogue. And in this case, the translation, or well, you're still in dialogue, or you're still in narration here. It's describing what triggers this, which then triggers this. Basically they're riding along, then they hit a virtual wall. Thancred gets upset. He basically cusses out the situation. So you got that transition where the narration flows into the dialogue, and then the dialogue is backed up by the narration. So Heimart swears, complains about a situation. Thancred answers, that's displayed as via narration, and then his answer via dialogue. One other thing with dialogue, which goes back to the punctuation and grammar, is the rule of question mark, exclamation, or comma only in this situation here, unless it's something that there is no tail on it, like he replied, she replied, etc., like that. Now another one that's come up, and this one's kind of hard to answer, and I don't think they say there's stated rules for this, which I really don't think there are, because I think it kind of depends on what the sentence is. But that goes with this part over here. In this case, he replied is the appropriate tail for this piece of dialogue, because the first person says something, and this person answers, therefore he replied. Then Heimart replies back, but you don't say he replied. You either say he said, or you put like an expression or an emotion, like he growled. In other words, he was angry. You can like here, ask the scribe. That could be like who is speaking, because like one of the things you got to consider is making sure the reader knows who's talking. This one here says he exclaimed. Who exclaimed? That's up here. Heimart. Heimart's the one who exclaimed. So then he replied. Who replied? That's up here. Thancred. So you set focus, dialogue. Set focus, dialogue. If you don't set the focus, you have to come up with something that says who says it on this part here, which is what happens down here with the scribe. And there's another one too, is this one here has no tail on it. Why is there no tail? Because you've got two people talking back and forth. You've already established that up here. Now, when you come down here, there's no need, there's no emotion, there's nothing there that has to be expressed. Therefore, you can just, here's the dialogue. The dialogue basically says what the emotion is. Nothing needs to be expressed. It sets the tone. And you already know that if this is Heimart and the other guy is Thancred, this therefore logically is Thancred. Well, how do you switch to another person? Well, then you put a tail on or something like ask the scribe. Now the focus switches from Heimart to the scribe, but Thancred's still in the rotation. And just to make sure the reader knows that, especially if an action needs to be expressed, you can put that here, and then the next one automatically becomes Thancred, and obviously there's no tail over here. Focus goes back to the scribe. So now Heimart's out. Again, Heimart's out of it, and you're back and forth between Thancred and the scribe. If you have multiple people all talking in rotation, you have to put tails on it to tell who is saying what, unless you have the preamble narration that switches the dialogue from person 1 to person 2. See, like right here, focus again changes, goes to a soldier. But since the last person here is oh, it doesn't. Okay, never mind. Yeah, okay, so I have to set it here. Since the last person is the scribe, but the next person talking is not the scribe, it's the soldier and Thancred, you have the soldiers denoted here. Thancred is brought in here. Then you have this one's a instead of a preamble, this is a well, foreamble, forelog, whatever you want to call it. It's the kind of the precursor to the dialogue, which is another way to do it. Usually you put it on the end. In some cases, you'll open it with a small piece of dialogue that then blends into, or a dialogue, excuse me, narration that blends into dialogue. This is used when putting it up here in the narration doesn't actually work. You want, in other words, the dialogue and the action or the narration item go together, or they flow as one together from point A to point B. Another thing too that I'll point out, which you can probably see here, is when you're writing, you want to break these up into their individual paragraphs or lines. And if you're doing a large section of dialogue, I would say, regardless if it's dialogue or it's narration, you don't want your paragraph any bigger than this, because it then becomes too hard to read. Another thing I do, which is not grammatically correct, because according to acceptable standards, there should only be one space after this, then the next sentence starts. I do too. The reason I do too is it makes it easier for me when I'm editing to see where one stops and the next starts. Otherwise, the sentences all blend together for me. If I have two there, it creates a notable block that I can see and realize, okay, next sentence is starting here. So you may decide to do that to make your editing easier. But yeah, like each line, each section of dialogue should be on its own line. Each section of narration should be on its own line, even if it's a gigantic paragraph like this. Let's see if there's something else I want. And don't mind all the red squiggly spelling issues thing, because those just haven't been added to my dictionary yet, because I've reset my dictionary since the last time I was working on these books, so these guys aren't automatically added in here. But if you've got a name and it's correct and you don't want to see those red squiggly lines, just right click, add to dictionary, and it goes away. And next time around when you're running that name, it will automatically recognize that and spell check it for you. So if you misspell the name, it'll go, hey, misspelling. So it keeps you from missing spelling errors and stuff of your own names and stuff like that. Here's another one with dialogue. Sometimes dialogue is one word. I mean, even we do that, Like those of you who have children or pets, how many times have you just looked at the animal and said, come, or stop, or something like that? I mean, that's completely legitimate dialogue. It doesn't have to be, a long sentence or anything like that. It could be one word. It could be 3 words. That's all it needs to be. I mean, how many times had our parents looked at us and screamed no? I mean, that's legitimate dialogue. That that one word relays a ton of information. Like, you're in trouble and don't do that. So now here's another one too, is a blending of the dialogue. Was it this person? Was it somebody else? What did they do? Some of the follow-up action afterwards. Try not to keep these tails very long. Try to keep them short. This one's a little bit long, but it had to be that way because it didn't work any better than that. Or I mean, you probably could have folded that into dialogue, but it really just kind of loses that continuity if you don't have that on there. So you kind of have to make a judgment call whether you need to or not. Oh, and I got sidetracked on another statement. Oh, that's right. I was going to hold that off till editing. Never mind. I'm just trying to make sure I'm covering all the bases and I was saying everything that I was supposed to say. But I was going to cover that other item, and this is like, wait, that's right. I was going to cover that in a different video. So, let's see if there's anything else. Oh, here's one too. Scene changes. When you talk about narration and dialogue, scene changes are important. If there's a major focus change, and not one particular part of a scene blending into another, like using Earthfleet for example, you've got say like during the Battle of the Orc Perimeter in the first book, the Orc Perimeter. A normal thing like this, you would go like, okay, we're talking about Mike and what's happening with his situation and everything. Scene change, because now we're over here and talking about Mobek and what he's doing. You can actually do scene changes where you blend scene 1 into scene 2, because like you could say Mike looked out the front window of a starship and looked at Mobek, who was gloating on his command deck, calling out orders. If you listen to that, you hear the scene shift. It goes from Mike's ship and where he's standing on his command deck, and it flows into the other scene with Mobek on his command deck. And that just stays all one scene, and you don't have this little delineation. Now, if it's Mike's over there going, okay, we're losing the fight, how are we going to fix this? Scene change, Mobek's over there having, chomping on a piece of fish and discussing with his admirals how they're going to celebrate their victory in 20 minutes, and that can be a sharp change. Or maybe it jumps from Mike's bridge to where Phyland was out at Cebius. The two are completely unrelated. They're entirely separate parts of the galaxy. You do not want to blend those two together, because there's the action and the events are not contiguous. They're not contemporary of each other. They're different locations, different people, different events. So it's like here you've got Thancred talking with his guys, and then this one is Simon and his group, and they're looking out across the water trying to figure out what they're going to do. Entirely different situation, different locations, different things going on. So you cut it with that scene change. And the scene change is delineated with 2 lines all by themselves. So you end your first one here, and then you're 1, 2, 3, and you start editing, or you start writing on that 3rd line, and start down. That's your next scene. How long do scenes usually need to be? Scenes, I've seen scenes be 1 line of dialogue. I think that's dumb, to be completely honest. Like, why did you do just 1 line of dialogue or 1 line of narration? 1 sentence. Why do a scene shift with that? Why not take that scene or that scene shift and flesh it out so you've got a couple paragraphs? It doesn't have to be big paragraphs. It could be a small paragraph and a couple of lines of dialogue, but at least it's got some substance to it. Like I said, there's no minimum length. You could have you could have 1 line of dialogue where it's a soldier walked out his front door, looked up at the sky and screamed, "No!" and then a scene changes again. Okay, that's fine. Although you kind of leave the reader sitting there scratching your head going, what did I just read? Because there's not enough there to form the picture. I mean, you see the guy do that, but why is he doing it? What was he angry about? What caused him to do that? And that the scene doesn't tell you that. I mean, you might tell the reader about that in another scene later on down the road, why that happened, what that meant, etc. But in the meantime, the reader's going to get all upset, and they're just going to look at you with stink eye, because you just broke their flow, you broke their experience, you did a hard reset on them, and they're not going to like that. So don't go and do those really, really ultra short ones unless it's like an action scene, and you're shifting to the other person only is temporary because you only need to be over there for a few seconds. If the scene is too short, try incorporating it into an existing scene. Just making it an addition. Take a small detour, a small little footnote over to that person or that area or whatever. Talk about it and then come back. So that's something you want to look into. Like I said, I've done short scenes before, but it's a case where the scene can stand on its own and it's necessary to be that way. Otherwise, no, just try and make it either blend it in with an existing scene or make it a much larger scene where where everything that needs to be told can be told, even if it's a small scene. So, oh shucks, I'm at 30 minutes and I think I'm actually out of content anyways. I think I covered the other stuff in plot twists. Yeah, I think that's all. I'll just stick with that for right now, and I'll just run with this for this video. And we'll cover, I think in the next video, we'll cover different kinds of, like, maybe not the next video, but in one of the future videos we'll cover editing, editing tools, little tricks for editing, things like that, stuff that will help. I'm not going to teach you how to edit. I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to give you tips and tricks for best editing, because editing is something that, like, an English teacher or an English book can teach you. That's something I don't need to teach you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you tips, tricks, items that are tools of the trade, ways to get the best results out of your editing. Because when it comes to creating a book, the initial creation, creating the rough draft, creating the story, that's the fun part. Editing is the part where you're putting the spit and polish on it, and that's the part that's the grind. Now, when you get done, you're glad you did it, you enjoyed it, it was fun. You get to read your own story over and over again and keep making it better as you go along. But yeah, like I said, that's also that's the more difficult. That's the difficult part. That's the part that everybody really kind of hates. There are very few people that actually enjoy editing. But again, it's an important part of writing and being a good writer, because one of the things with editing is it helps you become a better writer by, first you create, and then you improve and polish and stuff like that. And the more editing you do, the better you get, because you learn to spot problems and spot them early and often, and prevent them from becoming a bigger issue. So anyways, I will leave it at that, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks.